Randy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So, I would love to start with your research on beauty and what people find attractive. There's an idea today that beauty standards are socially constructed and arbitrary. But your research has found that there is a very deeply rooted biological basis. So, I would love to hear what you found, and we can start with what men find attractive in women.
Okay. Well, more generally, there's now a field of evolutionary aesthetics, and it deals not only with human attraction and attractiveness, but other domains in which we make aesthetic judgments, like habitats and even values. That traditionally was part of aesthetics. So, sticking to the human attraction and attractiveness, let's start there. But more generally, I would say in that domain, what I'll have to say about human attraction and attractiveness is now in biology understood to be a physical attractiveness theory across species. Like, what is a beautiful bird to another bird? And what is a beautiful scorpion fly to another scorpion fly? It boils down to physical attractiveness as a health certification. And now we'll stick to humans. More is known about human attraction and attractiveness than any other species by far. Research has been, and not just by me, but it's a whole big research domain now in social psychology and evolutionary biology, looking at human attraction and attractiveness. And so we can think about it as the dimensions of health. And we'll start out with hormonal health. So back in the old days, so to speak, with the rise of the first vertebrates, that was a fish. There was the evolution of sexual dimorphism in the control of sexual development and sexual behavior, and that's many, many million years ago, with the evolution of sexual dimorphism and hormonal control, and with testosterone being the control for males and estrogen being the control for females. So estrogen controls in females all aspects, basically, of reproductive capacity, from the probability of ovulation through healthy pregnancy and on and on and on. The ability to uh, nourish the baby with the milk and so forth that's full of estrogenized fat and all that. So the hormonal aspects we start with, and basically what people look at and judge when they're talking about an adult female's attractiveness are estrogen features. And we can start with the body. Basically, the first thing people look at on a female bod is the ratio of the waist to the hips. That's the first thing the eyes go to, according to research. And that's a marker of estrogenization of the female, low waist to hip ratio. So a wasp waist kind of female body with a expanded hip, low, small waist. And then they move to the breasts, and perky breasts and upright breasts and so forth are estrogenized breasts. And thighs are important, the thigh structure and so forth. That's an estrogen marker as well. And then we can move to the face and what happens at puberty and adolescence in females as they mature into a semi-woman during the adolescence and puberty, is that estrogen caps the growth of certain facial bones. There are estrogen receptors in specific bones of the face of the female, and those bones are the chin, the jaw, basically all the structures of the lower bones of the lower face and the eyebrow ridges and so forth in here. So estrogen caps the growth of those bones. And jumping to testosterone in men now, testosterone with growth hormone increases the growth of those same bones in the male face. So that's why you get the sexual dimorphism in faces. So if you take female models, facial models, they have very, very small lower faces. You can measure that from when we do a lot of this research like that. And say the distance from the pupil of the eye to the bottom of the chin in relation to the whole head, whole facial frontal face. And so the female models that, the ones that score the pictures on the women's magazines, front cover pictures on the women's magazines, they have a lower face about the size of a 14-year-old girl. So
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's very, very dramatic. And
Interesting.
you can even take those model faces off the cover, digitize them into the computer, and reduce the lower face more with the computer, and they're rated more attractive than even they are on the cover.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah,
There's also this aspect of neoteny, right? Can you explain that to people?
yeah, that's the same thing. It's just you look like a younger version of your sex in the case.
Right. Big eyes.
Yeah, well,
Like a Disney characters always look neotenous, right? They have the big eyes, small faces.
the big eyes comes from, again, an effect of estrogen. What it does is, actually, men have bigger eyes in turn because men are bigger than females. They have bigger eyes, but the way the eyes are set in the head is sexually dimorphic. And the way that female eyes are set is they don't have the development of the eyebrow ridge here. If more estrogen, that controls the growth of that bone and all this bone around the eyes. So the eyes appear bigger in females than in males.
Interesting.
Testosterone, on the other hand, increases the growth of the all this.
Right. You get that ridge right above
That's
the
right,
eyebrow.
exactly. So all that's well researched, and there's nothing controversial in anything I've said so far. Yeah. So
Yeah, yeah,
that's
no, that's very interesting in terms of the sexual dimorphism. And for whoever needs a definition there, that just means that, humans are separated into male and female. And the fact that testosterone masculinizes the features and estrogen feminizes the
right.
features. And we've evolved to be attracted to these masculine and feminine characteristics. Now, there is a component of health that goes into beauty. Where does that play in, and how does that, what markers do we find beautiful in
Well,
that sense?
the female estrogenization of the female is correlated with general health and with reproductive health. So basic reproductive capacity of the female is a big component of health. And so the more estrogen, basically, we could say, in short, in biology, we use the term phenotypic and genetic quality of an individual.
Mm-hmm.
And it applies in all species, not just humans. But phenotypic and genetic quality of the female is estrogen dependent. And that relates to her health, all kinds of diseases and physical conditions and reproductive capacity are related to feminization of the female by estrogen. And even the bone structure, we got into facial bones, but a lot is known about just the basic bone structure of the body. So a very estrogenized female bone structure throughout the body we call petite. So she's petite, and that's attractive, of course. And that's what they're talking about is the way her general skeleton is measured, is constructed, affected by estrogen during puberty and adolescence. And the male testosteronization in males masculinizes males, and testosterone masculinizes females too. And estrogen is prettier than testosterone effects in women, and testosterone effects are more attractive in men than estrogen effects. Men have estrogen too, of course. And so you can measure the effect of testosterone on facial bones of men, on shoulder. It affects shoulder width and so forth in men. And so physical attractiveness per se boils down to, as I mentioned, a certification of health. And we've only talked about one component of health so far, hormonal health.
Right.
And there are other components. So another big component that we've done a lot with is developmental health, you could call it. And that's developmental stability of the individual. So the research has focused on symmetry, bilateral symmetry. So in forward-moving critters, forward-moving animals, the most adaptive form is bilateral symmetry. So, to think of an extreme example, if you say one leg is significantly shorter than the other, you have drag.
Right.
You use more energy when you move forward. For all forward-moving organisms, insects, people, monkeys, whatever, birds, bilateral symmetry is the optimal developmental goal. However, perfect bilateral symmetry is very difficult to achieve developmentally. And because when you're developing, there are all kinds of environmental perturbations that throw off the ability to make a perfectly symmetric body. And genetic bad genes that you have and so forth can also, as we know, interfere with the development of a perfectly symmetric body. So the more symmetric an individual is, the more that individual has resisted environmental perturbations during development, and the more that individual has fewer bad genes that interrupt development. So bilateral symmetry is a very good marker of phenotypic and genetic quality of the individual. And lots of species have been studied in that regard for mating success, attractiveness to the opposite sex, and so forth. Years ago, actually, during the symmetry revolution of research that began in the 90s, I discovered it first in insects, the importance of symmetry, and a colleague of mine discovered it in barn swallows, and then I got into humans. We made our discoveries of symmetry and its role in sexual selection simultaneously and independently. I was studying scorpion flies in Germany, and he was studying barn swallows in Denmark. And
amazing.
Yeah, the barn swallow tail symmetry. The females look at the symmetry of the male's tail in barn swallow.
Yeah, that's amazing that's cross species.
Oh
That's a
yeah,
marker
years
for.
ago, the biologists got right on it. When we published our results on birds and insects, other biologists studied it in their favorite species, and within a few years, there were 50 species of animals in which it had been shown that symmetry is important in sexual selection, mate choice, and competition for mates, and so forth. And then all in there, I was doing a lot of stuff on human symmetry, and with colleagues. A colleague of mine, Carl Gromer at the University of Vienna, and I discovered the importance of facial symmetry in attractiveness judgments. So it's bilateral symmetry of the face. And the face is an extremely complicated structure and very important. That's why we look at faces. It's got so much information in it. Not
Right.
just symmetry, but you got your hormonal information in the face, testosteronization, estrogen. You got your bilateral symmetry. And of course, the face expresses things too, emotions, and all. It's got a lot of emotional content
Right.
there.
We have a special area in the brain that perceives faces and
We
recognizes
do.
faces.
Yeah, we do. And so Gromer and I showed that bilateral symmetry is related to facial attractiveness. And then another colleague and I started working on body symmetry. And we measure 11 traits on both sides of the body and take the difference in that, and then sum those differences, and that is a estimate of the individual's body symmetry, like feet and fingers and elbows and ears and all that stuff. And that those symmetry measures correlate very importantly with uh, people's everyday lives, like in the mating domain.
Attractiveness.
Attractiveness, yeah. So more symmetric men, for example, we and others. I mean, there was a research explosion in the beginning in about mid-90s of symmetry studies, and men, more symmetric men, um, have more more mates, more higher mate number. More symmetric women do not. It's because men and women are different in that regard. Pursuing high mate number, that's a male thing. And so symmetric men are more attractive, physically attractive. They have more mates. They are less faithful in romantic relationships, and that has something to do with their physical attractiveness to other women. And we did a study, a detailed study of romantically involved couples, looking at faithfulness of males and females in those relationships. And also, we did a study of female copulatory orgasm frequency in relation to the symmetry of the male that she's paired with. And more symmetric males fire more copulatory orgasms, as reported independently by the males and independently by the females. And so that was interesting, the orgasm work. And so symmetric males are, just healthier, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one component of physical attractiveness, also related to health. And then the third big one in regard to health and attractiveness is age. So senescence. Yeah, as we age, we senesce. Of course, all organisms do, and that's a general deterioration of everything. Senescence. Yeah, and so we lose because it's a general deterioration. We're designed by evolution, by selection in the past, to pay attention to age, because age, age in women is very strongly related to reproductive capacity. So as women age, reproductive capacity declines very strongly, and as men age, reproductive capacity declines as well, just not as strongly as in women. And also in in ancestral environments, being fit and able to hunt and all that stuff, that's age dependent. Whether you can hear the what you're trying to, the game animals, and can see them and all that's age dependent. So age is another factor of the three. So you got hormonal health, you got developmental health, and you got age related health that comprise physical attractiveness. And that is a component of mate value. So in all organisms, your health is, we could be talking here about the barn swallows or peacocks or scorpion flies and so forth, and it's the same kind of thing. Health is
Right.
the criterion that is important in an individual's ability to succeed in competition for mates and mate choice, health. Yeah.
Right, right. I think, that's first of all important to know because it's the truth. I understanding what we find attractive and what we find beautiful isn't an arbitrary social construction, but
Oh no.
there are very deep reasons, evolutionary reasons why we find certain things attractive. And for anyone who's listening, who's losing hope here, I do want to go back to this central piece that we've been talking about, and that's health. And that's something that you do have control over.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't have control over your developmental health or your symmetry, but your hormonal health and your physical fitness, those are things that you really do have control over. Your nutrition, that shows up in your skin. Your hormones make a huge difference on the way you look. when I was 25, I was living in a mold infested apartment and I didn't know it. And slowly, it was, just poisoning me. And my hormones fell to the level of a menopausal woman for,
Oh, wow.
6 months or, yeah. And you start to see changes and your hair starts to fall out. And I was 25, but you start to see the body responding to the hormones or the lack thereof. So, whoever is listening, going to the gym, eating right, making sure you're not living in a mold infested apartment or you're not exposed to too many toxins. These things really show up. And, I heard someone joking that he came back from a high school reunion. He's around 35. And one of the things he said is that you really see people's habits in their faces around that age. You can get away with smoking and drinking too much, when you're 18 and you wake up fresh. But when you're 35, those kinds of habits really show up. So if you want to maintain that vitality, that youthfulness, and that health, look and still look attractive,
Right.
uh, you do have a lot of control over it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's a lot you can do to you know look better in terms of, and then and then there's the cosmetic side too, of course, that's very popular. So,
Yeah.
and all that is supportive of what I'm saying. So women, for example, do tummy tucks, and that's to improve the waist to hip ratio. Women do breast symmetry. Uh, they make them more symmetric, not less symmetric. If
Right. I don't
you
know. I
if
don't know that
you
I would recommend surgery. I would recommend finding a high mate, a high value mate that doesn't require surgeries to
but the surgery
to find you
works
attractive.
because ancestrally,
Yes.
it just mimics the same markers, and because it's evolutionarily novel, we haven't evolved to detect the difference between the surgical and the natural.
Yeah. On
That's
that, I saw that they manipulated the hip waist ratio of, they took photos of women and they manipulated the hip waist ratio to such an extreme that no woman has ever existed with that
yeah,
hip waist ratio, a Kim Kardashian, but to the extreme. And men rated that as more attractive.
yeah,
So there is almost something that, there we have these certain maybe inclinations built into us, but there's no switch to show us, where where that inclination has gone too far. If there's,
yeah.
a tendency to prefer a higher waist to hip ratio, we can't tell when it becomes artificial. So that's also interesting to note. I think staying as natural as you can and as healthy as you can is usually a good
That's good
uh,
advice. Absolutely.
yeah.
And
Something
all this,
I feel comfortable promoting here.
all the effects of smoking and other abusive things you can do to your skin. I mean, as you
Yeah.
say, by the time you're 35, you're going to see some of
You're,
that. Yeah,
exactly. And definitely the wrinkles show up and
yeah,
so there's a lot we can do. And, with that said, not pretend like these things don't exist, so understanding the dynamics in sexual attraction, I think is important, especially if you're, dating and looking for a partner and not ignoring them. Because I think some of the, body positivity messages that we hear today are a little problematic because they kind of normalize, unhealthy habits. And
right.
that's not helping anyone.
Well, I mean, you could imagine some research where you take people who claim, say, on ideological grounds, that they don't pay any attention to beauty, and when they're looking for mates. And then
Right.
you ask them to rate the faces or the bodies and so forth, and they come out the same way. See how they-
I'm sure you would see that. I'm
yeah,
sure you would see that. I think at the end of the day, we can spout ideology as much as we want, but when it comes to, the people that we choose for ourselves, I think we would see that show up there.
Yeah, the design of our brains by evolution will come through every time. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 exactly, exactly. So I want to switch gears for a moment and to talk about your parasite stress theory, which is absolutely brilliant, and I think will be very new for people in the
Uh-huh.
way that it really shows how our values and our, belief systems are biologically rooted, beyond, personality and genetics. So give us the layout of this theory.
Okay. Just stop me whenever
Yeah,
it's
I'll jump in.
confusing. Okay. It's the parasite stress theory. We call it the parasite stress theory of values and sociality, and it's a scientific theory about how we get our values. That is, the causes of our core values, and I'll tell you what I mean by core values in a minute. But on the it's an ecological and evolutionary theory of the causes of our values. So on the ecological time frame, that is during our lifetime, we're growing up and we create, excuse me, we create our cultural information uh, by mechanisms in the brain that are specific to picking up cultural items selectively, like comparable to language psychological adaptation that uh, picks up the local language, even the local dialect, and discriminates as an individual's growing up. Gets that, but we get other aspects of culture from similar psychological adaptations, but that are specifically designed to pick up other types of cultural information. And values are very important to us as part of our cultural repertoire that we acquire as we grow up. So that's on the ecological time scale during an individual's lifetime. And what the theory says is that um, as individuals grow, if they're exposed to the effects of infectious disease as they're growing up and information about infectious disease, then they pick up values on the right of the continuum of values. So more conservative values when they're growing up and encountering through effects of diseases on them, number of times your immune system's activated, the intensity of that activation, and so forth, and information in the local culture about disease threats. All that information affects which way on the ideological continuum of values you go. And high disease, you go toward conservative, and I'll explain why later. Low disease encounters growing up, you go toward the liberal end and of values. Let's take conservatism first. So, what conservatism values do is they're defensive against infectious diseases as follows. So, first, you have the component of xenophobia that we know as well, very fundamentally related to conservative values. And the more conservative you are, the more xenophobic you are. So,
Right. Just
what's
for people who might not be familiar with the term, what does xenophobia mean here?
yeah, xenophobia is outgroup dislike and avoidance. So, outgroup. And so people that are very, very xenophobic don't like people that look different than them, that talk different from them, that have different views of the world, and so forth. So it's an outgroup dislike and avoidance. And the reason that is effective against infectious diseases is infectious diseases and hosts, and here we're talking about humans as hosts, co-evolve. It's a constant co-evolutionary race between hosts and their infectious diseases. And you the outcome of that co-evolutionary race with infectious diseases is that hosts are relatively immune to local diseases, but the coevolutionary races are geographically very specific. So it's localized, geographically very localized with infection. You get different strains of TB in different neighborhoods and so forth.
Right, right.
Even, certain diseases in classic example, villages in Sudan, different diseases in villages that are close to one another, and so forth. So it's a very localized phenomenon, this coevolutionary race between hosts and their diseases. And so you have the relative immunity to local diseases, but you're not immune, relatively not immune to diseases outside your local realm of people and that you interact with. The local people have that similar immunity, and so they're safe to interact with. Whereas those people outside have maybe carrying diseases that would really be detrimental to you. So the localization, extreme localization of host parasite coevolutionary races means that xenophobia, which is characteristic of conservatism, is defensive against those foreign diseases. Okay, and so the another part of the disease, theory is that the ethnocentrism in general, and it's a localization of your social contacts, so your parochial and your social contacts, and that's an in-group preference. And also, you have very strong ties with these local people, including your extended family, and that provides safety when the diseases come. So it manages infectious diseases, the ethnocentrism, that you have these strong ties with your extended family and so forth. We did a study about family structure in relation to conservatism and liberalism across the world, all the countries of the world. And the more infectious diseases, more conservatism, the more extended the family structure is of people, whether you're talking about the USA or Iran or whatever, works beautifully. So you have the theory really is to protect you against infectious diseases, your values do, and to deal with the level of infectious diseases. So conservatism, protective against infectious diseases, and then you could go to liberalism. So liberalism has its benefits. You have a big social group. Okay, you're open. You're not biased toward people that are like you and look like you and talk like you and think like you. You're open. You have a bigger social group. You have a bigger mating pool as a result of that. More mating options because you're open. You don't mind people that are different color, speak a little different. That's fine. Liberals are much more likely to say marry outside their uh, type and so forth. That's well known, that kind of thing, and date outside their type and all that. Um, so you have this bigger social pool. Also, with liberalism, you have openness to new ideas, and that's closed. All that's closed in conservatism. Closed-mindedness is called, and but liberals, you're more open, and that allows you to have a flow of new ideas. You evaluate new ideas rather than just ignore new ideas and avoid new ideas altogether, as in conservatism. So liberalism has its benefits, but the cost of liberalism have to do with more exposure to infectious diseases, because your openness to others that are different from you will expose you to infectious disease. Your openness to ideas coming from the outside can expose you to infectious diseases. And so liberalism is adaptive as a cultural ideology when disease levels are low. And conservatism is adaptive when disease levels are high. So that's kind of the theory. And then we tested it in lots and lots of ways. And it's a big research area now. A lot of people are looking at it, and that makes me happy. Uh,
Amazing.
Yeah. But what we did first is, I mean, just this straightforward, more infectious diseases in a country or state of the United States, the more conservatism you have. And cross cultural psychologists and political scientists have measured, they've been very interested in values. So they measured conservatism and collectivism, same thing basically as conservatism throughout the world and in the United States and so forth. So the data in the literature on the values that we pulled from the literature, and then when there good disease data too across the world, across the states of the U.S., the World Health Organization data like that. They keep disease data, updated all the time. You can use their data. There's another data source too, Gideon, that does a really fine job on disease, and the World Health Organization, Gideon, the disease data about the same because they do it right. And then in the U.S., there's Center for Disease Control, and they keep up with diseases for the states. So we had U.S. state data, international data on diseases, and we had this literature full of information about values that cross-cultural psychologists and political scientists had accumulated. And they worry a lot about how to measure values right and so forth, and so they got it, they got all that. And we just put them together. More infectious diseases across the world or across the states, the more conservative people are. And so we did that. Yeah, and others have with the recent pandemic. That's been very interesting because the last pandemic, major pandemic with flu in 1918 and so forth was very interesting. It's turned out there's been a lot of research on
Right, the Spanish flu.
Spanish flu, the effect of that pandemic on the change of values. And here is the story. The Third Reich, Germany, did a lot of bad things, but one thing they did was they kept data on all kinds of stuff. There were data that some scholars dredged out from those old data sources on the number of TB cases in each city in Germany, the number of several other diseases, including flu cases. And what they showed, and then they had data on the votes for the Nazi Party in 1930 and in the 30s by city. More cases of flu in particular, the more the people voted for the Nazis. So
Incredible.
that's fascism. That's over all the way to the right end. That fascism is just extreme conservatism, and so that worked beautifully for Germany.
Right,
They,
right. I wanna jump in there and
yeah,
say a few things about that because this distinction between left and right, and we'll get into the terminology because I think any Burkean conservatives might might find offense that we're conflating the two. But if we just look at this distinction between right and left and the right wing authoritarianism that we've seen throughout history,
yeah,
Germany is a perfect example because, as we know, in terms of personality traits, people who are, on the right wing, they're higher in conscientiousness, specifically orderliness, which makes them very meticulous, and they love data and they love to, keep tabs on the diseases in the different cities as they've done, and they're lower in openness. So these two personality traits really speak to what you're saying of being much more careful about securing borders, much more
oh
suspicious of outsiders,
yeah,
and
that's xenophobia. Yeah,
yeah, and
oh,
that's incredible that you can relate that to the infectious diseases and the Spanish flu and how it caused the rise in this right wing authoritarianism. It's incredible because On the other hand, the liberalism that we've enjoyed, in the last 200 years or so, since the Enlightenment, we like to think that we're more progressive than our ancestors and smarter and wiser. But you understand that there is the understanding, first of all, that technological advancements usually bring about cultural changes. But here you understand that it's not only the technological advancements, it's actually the fact that we have enjoyed areas with less infectious diseases. And it's no surprise that, the Enlightenment happened in higher altitude places
Absolutely. That's
where,
target specifically. Yeah, you're on target. Yeah. Uh,
yeah,
all the big technological advances, intellectual advances, you could call it generally. That's high latitude stuff. Yeah.
right, right. And we are,
Yeah.
we are in a constant dynamic relationship with our environment. One of the
Yeah.
things that I found very interesting in your work is that there are more tribes or ethnic groups if you look at lower latitude places, closer to the equator.
Mhm.
You have more variety, of languages, of ethnic groups within.
Religions, and languages, yeah, are predicted
Yeah.
by more parasites, and that's because of the xenophobia that fractionates and vaccinates a culture. You have a culture, and you get disputes, and you get localization of values. You get xenophobia that creates fractionation and factionation, and you get new cultures arising. And the religious scholars have long been interested in why there's so much variation across the world in a number of religions. I mean, you're talking tremendous variation. And the same with the linguists interested in language diversity. And we showed them. You predict it all very strongly on the basis of infectious disease level. Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's
But
incredible.
with
And
regard to the rise of the National Socialist Party, uh,
yes.
there's another story about Italy. Just came to light. New paper, relatively new.
Oh, tell me
So,
about it.
yeah. So fascism, extreme fascism, the highest authoritarianism arose three times at about the same time. So you got Nazi Germany, you got Japan, and you got Italy. So the Italy story is the same as the Nazi story. That data on flu uh, and flu levels. Flu's the best one. I mean, there was TB and lots of other diseases too back then, of course. And but TB is the best predictor. And in Mussolini's program, more flu cases, the more votes for Mussolini's gang. And Mussolini was an interesting character in all this. He outlawed handshaking in
Oh,
Italy.
wow.
Yeah, he disgusting thing touching some stranger's hand. And
And they're a very kissy culture too. They give like two kisses whenever they say hello.
yeah, so that's
Wow.
all very cool. We don't have data on Japan yet, but maybe there's data somewhere somebody will find.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting
On,
to look at.
that was
You
kind of a
know,
different kind of thing. It was an emperor in Japan.
right.
I mean, that's typical authoritarian. You have this holy leader, that everybody follows, and whether it be an emperor or you call it something else, Hitler.
Right. Very collectivist culture as well. It's
Um,
interesting to see the history there in
yeah,
terms of the diseases. But I think, it's important to note as well that both of these strategies, conservatism and liberalism, there's trade-offs, right? There are
yeah,
strategies that, they complement each other, and neither are good at the extreme, but we need both. We need the structure, and we need tradition, and we need the family unit. But we
yeah,
also need to renew ideas and, to be tolerant to new people. And, we need innovation, and we need inspiration and creativity. And there's dangers to each sides of these when we take them to the extreme. I think what's very interesting today, we're seeing things kind of flip on their head. We're seeing left-wing authoritarianism come about. It's interesting that, in terms of COVID, for instance, you saw more kind of a hypochondriac reaction from the left. The left were wearing masks, and were more promoting lockdowns than the right. So what was your take on the COVID situation?
Actually, the research on masks is
Yeah.
more conservative the place, the more mask use and more following of rules. That's what the research shows.
Really,
Yeah.
really
The only outlier is Republicans in the United States,
interesting.
and they were following their emperor's guidance. Trump said it was just all a hoax, there's nothing to it, and all that stuff, and not, wearing a mask was just being PC and all that. And so, but that was a very localized thing in the United States.
Right, right.
Papers
The
on it.
masks got branded
Yeah.
with the wrong side. I see.
Some
I think, yeah,
of your viewers may want. We've talked about latitude a little bit, you and I.
yeah.
I should mention just that that's a very strong pattern, that infectious disease is predicted by latitude. The higher the latitude, the less infectious diseases, and that has
Right. And let's explain why that is
yeah,
actually.
it's the ecology of infectious disease distribution, and the reason is diseases in general like it wet and warm, and they do better if it's wet and warm in general.
Right. Tropical.
Yeah. And so, in the equator, you have the most infectious diseases and so forth. And Denmark and Sweden and places like that, very high latitude, the most liberal places in the world don't have many infectious diseases. Yeah.
Interesting. I always wondered, this is purely speculation, but why philosophy was born in ancient Greece. I always thought it was something about the ecology there. And there's something perfect about the weather there, that it's hot. So it's, you don't, you're not hibernating for 6 months out of the year, but it's also dry. So there aren't too many diseases going around compared to places like India, for instance.
Right, sure.
Right. So it's interesting. We obviously don't have data going back, but maybe the current ecology there is comparable. That would be interesting to look at. I wanted to speak also about this idea of ethnocentrism, because that really plays a role when you have more diseases. Ethnocentrism, not only in terms of fear of others, right, but maintaining that family unit. Why is it important in places like these?
The in-group unit. So, making sure you're socializing with people that have the same beliefs and so forth. And that can be within the family or broader, local people. And that has to do with the extreme localization of the coevolutionary races that I mentioned. So that's why you get high ethnocentrism in high disease areas. Said differently, you get high ethnocentrism in conservative areas, and more conservative, the more ethnocentric. Yeah.
Right. And that, when you're sicker, you're going to need people taking care of you, right? So there's a strategy there of keeping the family unit very close, which I found really interesting in your work. That there is
the theory is a theory about your values in relation to levels of infectious disease to avoid infectious disease, and also to manage infectious diseases. And the ethnocentrism is important in the management aspect of the theory. Yeah.
Right. And I found it interesting also that you mentioned nepotism, which is something that we see in countries that are closer to the equator, and we call it corruption and in
Extend.
our,
Yeah.
what's that?
That's what we did with the family structure, cross cultural, across country, and across U.S. state data. It's basically the extension of your nepotism. How far out in terms. So in conservative places, real conservative places, they're in contact with distant cousins and so forth all the time. And part of that has to do with something we haven't discussed in relation to the values, and it is what biologists call philopatry. Philo
Mm,
means love, patry, where you're from.
right,
Philopatry.
right.
So
Like
you start
patriotism.
patriotism. Yeah, it comes from the same word etymology. So in high disease areas, it makes sense to stay put because those habitats out there far away are going to have infectious diseases that you're not immune to. So philopatry is very characteristic of conservative places. They just stay. I mean, they uh, live generation after generation where they're born, and
Right.
more conservative, the more that effect. And there's studies like how often do people travel? Say in the U.S., there have been some studies, and that's related to core values too. The
Right.
conservatives.
Liberals have passports and conservatives usually don't.
There you go.
Yeah,
There you go.
yeah. I found it interesting as well that spicy foods are also a component here of, places closer to the equator because you have higher levels of, parasites and whatnot. That the
Spicy,
spices help to
good
block that
antibiotics.
out.
Good antibiotics. Onions and garlic and stuff like that are kill the gut
Yeah.
bug. Yeah,
Yeah. No, that's incredible how our culture, we talk about culture as if it's a human invention, but it's in a constant dynamic relationship with the environment we're in, right? Culture and
absolutely.
nature kind of go hand in hand, and culture really is a response to nature in a sense. So I think it's an interesting way of looking at it. Um, I wanted to jump in to one of your, very important books. You wrote the book, The Natural History of Rape.
Yeah,
And I think, we're going to talk about it academically. And obviously this is not a light issue. And for anyone who has, actually gone through it and suffered from it, um, all due respect. And we, as a country here, have been reminded about of what warfare can bring, and we've been reminded that mass rape is a potential when it comes to warfare. And I think you've also shown that that's something that you see in cultures throughout history. So I think one of the very important pieces of your research is that you show the evolutionary reasons for why rape exists. And just to preface anyone who thinks that this is an excuse, right? The naturalistic fallacy. If it comes from nature, then it's okay or appropriate. I think it's more important to understand the truth behind how we work if we have any chance of creating a society and a system, a social system that's able to deal with these things and reduce the likelihood of them occurring.
yeah,
So that's just kind of to introduce this topic. You have a few questions listed in the first chapter of what the evolutionary approach can help us answer when it comes to sexual coercion. So I'll start with the first one. Why are males usually the rapists and females usually the victims?
yeah. That goes back to a fundamental sex difference in in humans and other animals too. So males are sexually selected for high partner number. So they evolve as a result of sexual selection for traits, psychological traits of being motivated to obtain high mate number, pursue high mate number, and so forth. Females aren't. They're not a high mate number pursuit sex. And the reason for that has to do with the sexual difference in the cost of reproduction. So a male can reproduce successfully by a relatively cheap ejaculate and a few minutes of time diverted from other things important to reproductive success and survival. So that's the male's minimum necessary for successful reproduction. Now contrast that with the female minimum for successful reproduction, say in our species. You start off with a big gamete, and then you've got pregnancy, and that goes on for 9 months. And then you've got child care after that, and females do most of the direct child care in our species. The males do have a very important role too in raising successful children, but and family and so forth. But there's this tremendous asymmetry in the minimum investment necessary for successful reproduction. As a result of that, throughout evolutionary history, males have been favored that maximize the number of mates because that increases reproductive success because of that small minimum investment necessary for successful reproduction. So high premium put on high mate number, that's one thing that's important for understanding the answer to your question. And also men with this, because of their design for pursuing high mate number, they overestimate in women the women's sexual interest. There's a lot of research on that.
Right.
Yeah,
David Buss has done quite a bit of research on that. Men misperceive, a friendly hello as sexual interest,
right.
And women usually underperceive, which is another component here.
They're more discriminating and logical and realistic about what's going on when boy meets girl, so to speak. Yeah, and so that's part of the package too. The design of men's brains pursue high mate number, the seeing sexual interest when it's not there, and those two things alone are going to, you can see how that would lead to more rape, right?
Right. And why is it that younger males rape more than older males?
Very strong pattern. Younger males are just more risk prone. Younger females are more risk prone too, but males are more risk prone than females. And that's seen in all the accident mortality data. Even before puberty, males are dying at a higher rate.
And is that driven by testosterone mostly?
Yeah, at an approximate level, but sexual selection in terms of ultimate causation built the risk proneness, because male ancestors that didn't take any risk weren't going to reproduce. They weren't going to go out there and get food that then they could trade for sex and be brave in warfare and all that kind of stuff. Be brave in male competition in general.
Right.
Risk taking as a mating premium throughout human evolutionary history for males. So you get these things, and then let's see. That's basically it for the sexual asymmetry and minimum investment, men's overrating sex, and also another thing though that could be mentioned there, and to answer your question fully, is men's sexual interest in a female and arousal, the actual erect penis and motivation to use it. That's men don't require willingness on the part of the female. So there's no, she doesn't have to be interested. And men, there's a lot of research on men's arousal just to video and audio depictions, and men's interest in porn, for example. All that's The female's not interested in mating with the guy who's watching the porn or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's not a necessary requirement. That would make raping a man more difficult in that end if a woman would
That's right.
want
And
to.
also, men rape children, and that the kids aren't interested. Obviously, men rape farm animals commonly. The cows and sheep aren't interested. So there's a lot of evidence that for that fact that men's sexual arousal does not require
Right.
interest in the partner.
And what is the age of the average rape victim?
It's strongly related to for male-female rape, which is the, the typical kind. I mean, male-male rape is very common too, and because again, males high mate number, and they're very easy to arouse sexually and so forth. And but the pattern with female victims is reproductive age females. We could start there. So you got prepubertal females, and those are girls. One could call those girls. They're not women yet in the sense of having reproductive capacity before puberty. So pubertal up to about 35, age 35. By 35 in the big data sets and so forth, the victimization rates of females goes down. And then you have, there are different kinds of rapes, but still that pattern holds of young females. Females are reproductive age, and
Right.
so the data peak actually in lots of data sets on about 18 to 20, and those are ages of peak current fertility. With lots of females, you get an adolescence period where there's relatively few ovulatory cycles. It's even been called adolescent sterility. It's not sterility; it's adolescent reduced fertility. And then at about 18 to 20, you get lots and lots of ovulatory cycles. The females looking real good in terms of estrogen ornamentation that we talked about, and so those are the peak years, say 18 to 25, yeah, and then it
Right.
declines.
What would you say to the argument that rape is just about power? It's not about sex.
Well, I would say that sexual arousal of the male perpetrator is necessary for the rape, and it's necessary for the rape, and it's sufficient. You don't need the other things to explain rape. Also, I would say that rape, just like lots of other motivations, can have, like other behaviors, can have multiple motivations. So if the guy's sexually aroused, obviously, if he's got an erection, he's sexually aroused. There's no other way to explain his erection. And then if he's raping a female, if it's physically forced sexual coercion, there are other kinds of sexual coercion we could talk about, but physically forced sexual coercion, that is rape, if it's that, then obviously he's motivated to control her, right? To accomplish the sex. So you have to distinguish between the sex and the means of getting the sex. And the means of getting the sex include physical control of the female and so forth. And there's been a lot of research on, so rapes that include murder are very, very rare in actuality. So the guy's not there. If the point were to brutalize the female and so forth, then the mortality rate of victims would be quite high, and the female. So that's what I would say to those that think. And there is that tradition of thought, but they're way outside of reality.
Yeah, and I think it's problematic when you're sending young girls off to college and you're not equipping them with the facts,
Yeah.
the fact that men are more risk prone. They're more likely to, to assume that you're interested. They'll, there are those that will conveniently ignore, you know,
Yeah.
protests. And being careful is really, really important. Just knowing that these facts exist, and that you do have power in the situations that you put yourself, and not to pretend like these things are only motivated by power, and that men and women are exactly the same. And it's harder for young women to um, filter out the assholes. The radar has not been calibrated yet. That happens,
Young
uh,
females themselves are very sexual, so it's tough, and that's one reason that Craig Palmer and I started that research. We wanted, it's for women, knowledge of sexuality and what's going on with rape and other, just sexuality in general and sex differences and all is is power when it comes to women's ability to control their lives in general and especially their sexual lives. You got to uh, know what's going on with those males, and you know, yeah,
right.
that's one reason we wrote the book. The other reason is much of my research is in the domain of what biologists call sexual selection. And if you're interested in sexual selection, you're interested in sexual coercion because that's one type of
Right,
sexual
right.
selection. Yeah, one domain of sexual selection. Mate choice and competition for mates is another other
Right.
domain.
And you said that there are types of sexual coercion, right? It's not only
Not only
physical
rape,
forcing, right?
right,
So what would those be?
rape. The other two types are intimidation and harassment. So the way that works, and it's like chimps have all three kinds too. It's not just a human thing. But so what the male does with harassment is he harasses the female, inflicting costs on her, therefore, to the point where she complies. And it's like physically forced copulation in the sense of circumventing female choice. That's what sexual coercion basically does, and that's why it's so terrible for women because it circumvents a major avenue of ancestral and current reproductive success, mate choice, choosing the mate and the sire of your kid. But so the male harasses her to the point where she complies and gives him a copulation to avoid further costs. And intimidation is a similar thing. Intimidation, the male instills fear in the female. So I'm going to kill you, I'm going to kill your kids, or do something like that.
Right. Or fire you. That is a
With
complaint
that,
that's
yeah,
often heard,
yeah,
right?
right, right. That's the high status men, and get into
Right,
that.
right.
That's one type of rape category. You've got the bulk of rapes are by young men who are socially disfranchised. That's the bulk by far. And then you get into the
Interesting.
category of men who are high status that are in situations that they of impunity, really, really of impunity. If they have enough money and status, they can be basically uh,
They can get away with it,
get away with it.
basically. Yeah.
And they can sometimes get away with it in some of these high-profile cases recently of serial rape because the female really needs the male's support, like to get a acting job or something like that.
Right. That isn't
Uh,
the norm, though. That isn't usually
no,
how
no,
rape
no.
happens, but that is the high profile
Yeah.
cases that.
So the message there to women is, I mean, even if the guy's got $1 billion, and he may be a guy who is fast track. We could talk about that life history stuff, and impulsive, therefore, uh, and thinks he's great and all that kind of stuff that goes along with the dark triad kind of guys.
Right. Narcissistic, psychopathic.
Absolutely, absolutely. Even if he's, Bill Crosby. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Even if he's got it all,
yeah,
it's amazing, these cases. So, you have shown that rape is something that we see in warfare across cultures,
yeah,
and we experienced it on October 7th, and there were horrific accounts, and I don't think anything will be able to really explain what happened there. But what have you found in terms of the history of this?
yeah. The warfare thing is very straightforward in regard to the benefit and cost situation. So in war, you have the guys are out there with anonymity, really, say in Vietnam or somewhere.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
They're out there in the jungle and they take over a village and they kill the guys in the village or run them off. You got all these young attractive females left in the village, and you get lots of gang rape, and that goes not just Vietnam, but everywhere there's war. Uh, and An interesting anecdote that characterizes that: two officers in the U.S. Vietnam War, contacted me years ago when I was doing this stuff, and said they had been just haunted and intrigued by the way their men behaved when they would go into. So these are officers that are there right in the jungle with the guys. They go into the village, they take over the village, they kill the guys or run the guys off. And then one of them put it, one of these officers put it, these church boys all of a sudden became gang rapists. And it has to do
Wow.
with the low cost and high benefit, presumed high benefit of raping all those pretty young women.
Wow.
That's the way it is in warfare.
Wow. Wow. That's horrific.
Yeah, church boys,
The church boys.
gang rapists all of a sudden, and that it intrigued him. And the other one too that contacted me, the same kind of story, is his experiences in Vietnam. But
What, how do you explain that shift, of people who are in their daily lives, in this case, church boys living moral lives? What happens there
yeah,
that
well, it's a
makes that
perception.
okay?
Yeah, it's a perception of benefits and costs, and so basically, what we have foundational in this is the hypothesis that men have in their heads a sexual coercion adaptation that pays attention to the perception of benefits and costs pertaining to adaptive rape in human evolutionary history. The conditions, in human evolutionary history that generated the selection for this piece of machinery in male heads. Is basically a rape adaptation or sexual coercion adaptation, pays attention to benefits and costs. So when the male is put in a situation where perception of benefits are high and perception of costs are low, then that can immediately trigger, as it did in the church boys going into the village, and say, a man that's a woman's got a date with a stranger. He's seems to be a nice guy and all that kind of stuff, and they go a long walk in the deep woods. That too could be a
Right.
situation
Low cost.
trigger. Yeah, low cost. Right, low cost.
Interesting.
So
Interesting.
we need to know that. I mean, that's one reason we wrote the book is
Yeah.
that knowledge of sex differences in sexual design and knowledge of basically men's sexuality and women's sexuality, their choice, and so forth. All that is critical to being safe out there in terms of the
Right.
sexual
Right.
environment.
And I think, it's important to note here that not all men are rapists, obviously, even if we have this natural selection tendency, and we have this phenomenon, throughout history. Not all men rape. And I think the problem with the efforts to reduce rape today is that they're, communicating in a way that only the good guys are hearing, right? This notion of toxic masculinity, of any sign of a masculine trait
Yeah.
automatically and being inherently toxic. The guys who are going to rape don't care that you're calling them toxic, but
Right.
the good guys who actually want to fit in, they want to be good men, they're hearing this message, they're hearing that their sexual desire is creepy, and that they're immediately rapists if they ask you out on a date. And I think that's
That's yeah.
really terrified young men today.
Right.
um,
There's a lot
yeah.
of research on these guys who, I mean, if you take men in general, and there's been a lot of research on this, you show them videos of
Yeah.
rape situations, and these are not really rape situations of gratuitous violence. That turns off essentially all men. Rape videos, say, of gratuitous violence, but you show them just standard, you know, force mating porn shows, and there's a lot of research on that. A lot of men aren't aroused, and but lots of ordinary men are, and this is college students, community men, and so forth, are raised to those cues, and the ones that aren't are interesting. I mean, the approach we have worked on is it has to do with this life history variable of fast track and slow track. So guys that are fast track are more impulsive. They're
Right.
less empathy. Their social situations are short term. They're exploitative, manipulative. That's fast track, and women can be fast track too. It's called life history theory. That's a component of evolutionary theory, and it
Mm-hmm.
depends on your rearing environment and in terms of resource predictability, availability, and predictability of resources when you're growing up. So basically, in short, if you grow up poor, uh, resources aren't available, not predictable, and so forth that you need for survival, then you end up fast track. And the poorer you are, the more fast track. And these guys are very impulsive. They start sex earlier, a lot of coercive sex, all that kind of stuff. And on the other hand, you raise guys with a resourceful uh, kind of background, and you get slow track. These guys are, they're not, they can delay gratification. They're not impulsive, and they got empathy. They care about what they do to other people. And it's a very different mindset. So that's a big factor to the life
Right.
history component of
Right,
it.
right. And we do hear these high profile cases. There was the, Stanford swimmer, like a guy on the swim team who was found, that he raped, one of the girls at the university.
Yeah,
And those are very high profile cases, and we hear about them. So it paints this picture of,
yeah,
the fortunate, well off, arrogant guy. But in reality, as you're saying, there's less of a likelihood that you're
yeah,
going to find, you know, sexual coercion in those areas. Although there's obviously date rape and things like that
yeah.
in
Very common.
colleges, but
But
even
again,
that, yeah.
that has to do with the track too. I'm sure, and probability that a woman's going to get raped if she goes on a date with a stranger should be predictable on the basis of his developmental background, and
Right.
that's
And
what,
his impulsivity, his just level of impulsiveness.
yeah, that's part of
These
it.
big personality guys, some of them
Some of
are
that
great.
narcissism too. Yeah,
Yeah.
if you think you're really great, then you get over in the narcissistic scale. Yeah.
If you were sending a young daughter to college today, what kind of advice would you give her in a fatherly manner, just so she handles herself in a way that can protect her? What would you say?
Well, it would be more than a comment. It would be
Right.
a short course, and I'm retired from teaching now, but for about 35 years, I taught of course, the evolution of human sexuality, and we get into sexual coercion and so forth, and emphasize the importance of knowing what science is and how important it is to apply science to understand the real human condition. If you don't know the human condition, don't know anything about people, really, from the scientific point of view, then uh, you've got you don't have the knowledge power that you need,
Right.
and especially in the sexual domain. So that's really a course, okay? And that's my daughter. My daughters have been through my course.
Many, many conversations.
Many conversations. But basically, I mean, Craig Palmer and I, we dedicated our book to the females in our lives, and it's for them, and it's for all females. That's one reason we wrote the book. Yeah.
Right,
So
right.
we
I do recommend it for people.
yeah, absolutely. If you want to really uh, know about sexual coercion that's in people, that's where you start. Yeah, with the scientific stuff. Yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Randy. This has been so wonderful, so fascinating.
Anytime you want to talk again, I'm willing.